a good friend of the show, a good friend of the program. Mike, good evening. I would like to just ask you, I'll read the tweet from Chris Mannix.
Please do, because there's a lot to unpack with the tweet. Who knows?
Okay.
There's a lot of words that are carrying a lot of weight here. So yeah, read it for me.
Okay, here we go. This is the Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated, also a friend of the radio show. We've had him on quite a bit. He's always been really kind with his time to us out here. He tweeted around 12:30 this afternoon. Teams are monitoring Chauncey Billups' situation in Portland, league sources told SI Now. The Blazers are rebuilding and just parted ways with two assistants, including Billups' brother, Rodney. If Billups and Portland split, Billups would quickly emerge as a candidate for other jobs. Your first, where were you when you saw it? Your first immediate thought was what?
I was at work. I was doing my day job. My first thought was yeah, because I mean, Sprague, you said the same thing on your podcast. I'm sure you said on the radio as well. Is that was a weird thing. They fired his brother. They chose not to bring his brother back and chose not to bring his lead assistant back. The generous read is that it's okay, hey, we're not going to fire you, but we do need to have new voices in because we need some value, with the change in the coaching staff. And we're going to change the back half of the bench, not the front half of the bench. But regardless, even with that rosy read, it's hey, this is odd. This is weird. It's weird to hire a lead assistant for a guy coming into the final year of his contract, right? Because you know who that person is? That's the new coach. That's the new coach. Even if they're only the new coach for a couple weeks before you do a real coaching search, when you get fired, the dude who they just brought in is going to take your job. That's a weird job to take, particularly if they bring in a veteran head coach of some sort. So, you know why they're monitoring it? Because me and you, Sprague, we're monitoring it too and saying, this is strange.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, Mike. I look, you and I, we text once in a while. I know you do a great job covering the Blazers on the LockedOn Blazers podcast. I know you saw Mannix tweet something very similar in January, in a random January day of, does Chauncey want to keep doing this? Does Chauncey want to keep being part of a rebuild? Very interesting thing to keep an eye on, something to that effect. And I remember doing the radio show and going, I think there's smoke. I think we've got smoke. And I had a couple people in my life that were like, I don't know about that. And I go, okay. And then they had their postseason podcast. Their end of season, we're leaving, getting the hell out of here, going on vacation pod or press conference. And my biggest takeaway from that was a guy saying out loud in a clear tanking season, he thought that they could make the playoffs and that they hope they take a step to do it next year. And then being followed up by the general manager saying, oh no, we don't have enough talent. We need to keep acquiring talent and developing talent. And I've been watching basketball a long time, man. And I'm not Mr. Know-it-all, but I can read tea leaves from time to time. And it didn't pass the smell test to me. So it did come out of left field, but also I'm not overly surprised given everything you just said about the assistants, one of which being his brother, but also because I felt like Mannix had created a little smoke in the middle of January, and I just picked up on that.
So if they were going to fire him, he would have been fired the day after the season ended. He would have never done the press conferences. He would have been fired. He would have, gotten on the plane when they were in Sacramento or whatever. He would have gotten on the plane in Sacramento. They would have said, hey, thanks. It was a great 3 years. It wasn't very good 3 years. It was mostly terrible. But hey, see ya, right? You can just pack your stuff up. You don't have to show up. You don't have to show up to exit interviews because you're fired. They're not going to fire him. I don't think there's any world in where Chauncey Billups gets fired in June. Come on. What we're talking about is him as Mannix mentioned in January, is walking away, is Chauncey Billups quitting. And what I think is what makes me raise my eyebrows is that, are the Blazers shadow firing him? Is this a shadow fire? Is this how you run an organization where you're saying you're going to make it, I'm going to make your life so miserable that you leave and save us a little bit of money? Is that what this is? because that's not good.
Mm.
That's not a good thing. That's not a good way to run an organization. That's not good for anybody. I don't know that that's what that is. Maybe this is the same thing in January, is that it's nothing and that it blows over, but it's like, I, I wouldn't want to work at a job where I knew the guy sitting next to me was about to take my job, but I also wouldn't want to. So I understand why Chauncey would be upset, but if you're from the outside, from the other side, like from fans' perspective, it's like, that's not how you want your team to operate. How you want your team to operate is firing Chauncey Billups the day the season ends because he's not a good coach. The end. The end. Like that. That's the much better scenario than the shadow fire here in May. Do you think? Okay, I want to ask you this. Like the last part of that tweet. You think he gets another job? Like, do you think Chauncey Billups would get another job in the league? There's a lot of open head coaching jobs right now, and potentially more potentially in Phoenix and Detroit. Like, you think he gets another job?
Okay, so I was texting with a couple mutual friends of ours today about this stuff, and everything you're asking there and the tone is right. Except you've been covering and been around the league long enough to know that this league is stupid and people do incredibly weird, random things. And so here's one for me. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Chauncey's a clutch guy, is he not?
He is, yes.
Okay. Is there currently a team in Southern California being run by Clutch?
Well, they're run by the family business, the buses.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay.
But yeah. There's a lot of influence, let's say, a lot of influence by Clutch.
Okay. So that was kind of one of the first teams I had put together in my head. And by the way, it'd be hilarious if that team hired him, given they just fired the former player that was supposed to be the great up-and-coming coach that LeBron instantly hated. Here's the other one, and somebody threw this at me, and I'm still not there, but sometimes smart people panic when they don't need to panic. If Denver gets swept, Malone basically, hold on, Malone threw them kind of under the bus of like, I can't believe that was the fight they showed when they were being pressed. Like, all time kind of they quit on me stuff. And I think they'd be moronic to fire Mike Malone. He's clearly one of the best coaches in the league. But Chauncey played there. It's, you know what I mean? Like, if you could sell something, and I don't think Nuggets fans would buy it, but it's sometimes in this league not about the smart move. It's about job preservation. And so, like, do I think he'd have a spot? I don't think anything about his career suggests he should. But I'm kind of with you on the shadow firing. You know, I don't know if, are you an only child? I don't know. A random question to ask.
I have an older child. I'm the youngest of two. I have an older sister.
Okay, you have an older sister. Okay. I have 3 brothers, okay? And I have varying relationships with all of them. But I can tell you, no matter what the relationship is, the only scenario I'm publicly okay with my brother being either let go or me being forced hand of let him go is if my team has massive expectations and we fall completely on our face. Every other scenario of my brother basically being fired without maybe my consent, it ain't flying. And so, like, when I saw him not being picked up and Scott Brooks, I'm like, whoa. And that was kind of dampered down a little bit, but I still think it doesn't pass what you just kind of threw out. It just doesn't logically make a lot of sense unless the scenario you said, a shadow firing, is really what they're after. Because here's what we do know. They can brag about building a kitchen at a practice facility, but we know they're not eager to buy out the final year of a coach's salary. That doesn't seem like a ton of fun for them. And so maybe this is either Chauncey acting out and saying, you better be careful, or this is what you're saying. It's a shadow firing, and we're kind of just waiting for Chauncey to either have something ready or him to just say, do I want 60 more losses on my resume where I'm already at a 321 winning percentage? No, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, right? Where it's like, this is coming from the Chauncey camp, whatever that is, Clutch world, where it's like, hey, you can force me out if you want, but I'm wanted across the league. I'm all of these things, right? Where it's like, you can do whatever you want, but you're going to see when I'm literally coaching the Lakers or whatever it is. He's not coaching the Nuggets. I'm not even going to address that one. But he's, but it's like,
By the way, I poo-pooed it pretty hard when it was texting me. I'm like, come on, man. Like they cannot possibly make that kind of move.
No, Michael Malone is mean in press conferences. That's what he does. He's mean. He's mean to his players. Also, they played like Garbaggio, and their season is in jeopardy. So he told them what they needed to hear. Probably, one of their players threw something at an official during the game. But I think. I wonder if this is a sign of just if this is a nothing sign of frustration, or if this is like the way that some things end. You know, the reason that things end is because they end poorly. Nothing ends well. That's not how jobs end. That's not how like coaches get hired to get fired. So this is just the beginning of a guy knowing, hey, regardless of what happens this time next year, I'm not going to work for this team. So I'm going to like, and they fired my brother. Okay, let's have it a shot across the bow, or it's the shadow firing thing, and it's the Blazers being cheap, and that is terrifying. That's, if you're a fan, that is a terrifying option, because it's like they won't just pay him to leave. They won't just pay him to go away. It's like $5 million. They won't pay him to go away. Come on.
I wanted to keep this one kind of short and just kind of pick your brain. I know you've got a Locked On Blazer podcast episode coming out for everybody that I'm sure is already subscribed to it, and I'm sure you go even more in depth. I've kind of been sitting in this for a couple months. I could be way wrong, could be way off. It could end up blowing up in my face. I don't know if they've done a whole lot to build much trust. And when you bottom out, I know we want to just say, well, if they get their SGA and their Ant Edwards, or, you know, if they get their version of a Jokic, whatever that be. But the history of this league kind of just says you could also be the Kings, where you pick consistently in the lottery and you get a bad bounce of a ping pong ball. You make kind of questionably bad decisions, like passing on Luka for Marvin freaking Bagley, when everybody that even wasn't a scout knew he wasn't going to be that good of a player. I think it's easier to kind of become that than it is to turn my TV on and go, oh, we're going to be the Thunder. We're going to be the Timberwolves. We're going to be the Nuggets, or the, you know, whatever it is. And I'm kind of by day, and this comes out today, so I'll just throw it on, I guess. This is more kind of backing of my feelings of, I don't know if they're very trustworthy. And I think when you don't have a lot of trust, it's like, well, you're now at the bottom. You're going to be the worst team in the West next year. Wemby and the Spurs won't be worse than you. They've got their guy. Where are you? I'll get you out of here on this. Where are you just kind of generally at on this rebuild, what you've heard, what you've seen through this process so far?
So I feel, you know, I did when the Blazers lost by 60 points for the second time in a span of 77 days, I did on the podcast. Yeah, it was a tough 80 days there. They lost by 60 twice. It doesn't happen to everyone, but it did happen to them twice in 80 days. But when they lost for the second time by 60, I did like my blame power rankings, and I had Joe Cronin at the top because, you know, I think the person who builds the roster deserves the most blame. I think I've been consistent with that over my 10 years of covering the team. I'm not going to change up now, but it's, you know, they were supposed to be bad, right? They're supposed to win 25, 28 games. They won 21. So it's not really the record. It's the thing you pointed to, where it's like, what's next? What's on the other side of the hill that you can say, hey, don't worry, it's going to be this. It might be Scoot Henderson. It might be Shaedon Sharpe, right? It might be, but we don't know. And some of that's out of the front office's control with injuries and stuff. And I think Scoot just wasn't as good as they thought he was going to be. But like, you know, I think they deserve some blame, and I don't think they've earned a ton of trust, but some of that it's totally out of their control. Some of that is beyond what they can do. I think this summer will be the make it or break it summer. And it doesn't mean that they have to be good next year. They might do some good things this summer and lose another 60 games. Like I think honestly, if they win, if they go 32-50 next year, cool. Like cool, right? They probably won't because they're going to be the worst team in the West, like you said. But they need to set themselves up where you either feel good about, hey, these are young players that you can build with and young players, or they need to set themselves up with enough draft picks, enough assets to say, hey, at least they got a lot of chances to get it right. At least they got a lot of chances. If they end up running it back and it looks really similar to last year and they say like, oh, it's going to be internal improvement, we believe in this, I will probably join you on the like truly nervous about the decision-making levels. Right now, I am teetering there, and I think that they deserve a ton of criticism. I don't think the front office has done a good enough job where you can say, I trust them wholeheartedly, although some people do, and that's fine. But like for me, I am not totally there and like, I don't know, I don't trust them, but I can see why you would lean that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I nobody's rooting harder. I mean, there are people, but like, I truly hope that Shaden becomes baby Kobe again, and I can kind of see it and feel it and get a vibe for it. And I hope Scoot takes a big step. I just think the public statements before trading Dame that led to trading Dame, to this Chauncey thing, to the, are you really going to do Shaden and Scoot together thing? I want to wait and see. I think you're totally right and fair on that. I just think there's a little more where it's, you said teetering. I'm going down on the teeter-totter. I'm going down right now, and I don't feel great about it. Maybe we'll launch back up, and I will readily say, hey, they did it. But right. That's kind of where I'm at. It's good to know where you're at. We've gone too long, taking too much of your time. You are a father, a working man, and you've done a hell of a job with the Locked On Blazer podcast. So the homie Mike Richman, you guys know where to follow him. Find him on Twitter. Find him on wherever you get your podcasts. He does a great job, and I'm sure he's got a great episode on this very topic. Thanks for hopping on late at night, Mike. I appreciate it, and great thoughts. We'll catch up soon.
Cool. Thanks for having me, man.